On a cool November morning in 1980, a fisherman drifts across a lake so shallow you could almost stand in the middle of it. 10 feet deep, calm, ordinary, when the water under his little boat begins to move, not with the wind, but with something pulling from below. And within minutes, that gentle Louisiana lake twists into a whirlpool a quarter of a mile wide, swallowing barges, a tugboat, 150-foot oil derrick, whole trees, and 65 acres of solid ground, dragging all of it straight down into the earth. And here's the part that still doesn't sound real. This entire catastrophe, one of the strangest man-made disasters in American history, was set off by a single mistake on paper, a measurement wrong by a matter of feet, and the one warning that might have stopped it was sitting in the darkness far below. We will get to that. This is Lake Peigneur in the flat coastal country of southern Louisiana, near a low green rise called Jefferson Island. For most of its life, it was about as dramatic as a puddle, roughly 1,300 acres of fresh water, home to catfish and cypress trees, ringed by a botanical garden that drew visitors from across the state. Picture a lazy Sunday postcard. That was Lake Peigneur. But the lake was hiding something. This part of Louisiana sits on top of enormous salt domes, ancient pillars of rock salt pushing up from deep underground. And salt like this can trap pockets of oil against its walls, which makes it very interesting to two very different industries at the same time. Below the lake, since 1919, the Diamond Crystal Salt Company had been carving out a working salt mine, a cathedral of tunnels reaching more than 1,500 feet down, with rooms 80 feet tall held up by nothing but massive pillars of salt left standing like the columns of a temple. And on the surface, in the autumn of 1980, an oil company wanted to know if petroleum was trapped around that same salt dome. So Texaco leased a drilling platform, floated it out onto the shallow lake, and hired a contractor, the Wilson Brothers Corporation, to sink an exploratory well through the lake bed. Two industries, one working from the sky down, one from the ground up, aimed at the exact same block of earth. And nobody, it turned out, had the map lined up quite right. Here's the thing you have to understand, because it is the whole disaster in a single idea. The drillers knew the salt mine was down there. This was not a secret. The plan was simply to drill near it, not into it. And the entire operation depended on one number, the exact horizontal position of the drill on the lake, measured against the exact position of the tunnels below. And that number was wrong. Investigators would argue for years about exactly how, whether it was a miscalculation, a triangulation taken from the wrong reference point, or, in the version many people still repeat, a mix-up between two units of measurement. What is not in dispute is the result. The 14-inch drill was not where the paperwork said it was. It was boring directly above one of the mine's upper chambers, aiming a steel bit straight at the roof of a hollow room the size of a cathedral, with an entire lake sitting on top of it. Think of it like this. Those salt pillars holding up the mine were doing the job of a plug in a bathtub, keeping the water above separate from the empty space below. Nobody meant to pull the plug, but that is exactly what a drill in the wrong place was about to do. That morning, the crew felt the drill bite down to around 1,230 feet, and then it simply stopped. Stuck. At such shallow depth, a stuck bit is usually a minor annoyance, so they did what any crew would do. They tried to work it loose. And that is when they heard it, a series of loud pops from somewhere below the rig, and the platform began to tilt, slowly, toward the water. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they understood enough. The order went out to abandon the platform, and the men scrambled for the shore, which is the only reason we are telling this as an engineering story and not a body count, because the real drama was unfolding half a mile underground. Down in the mine, in the dim electric light of the tunnels, an electrician named Junius Gaddison heard a strange banging coming up a corridor. He went to look, and what he found was fuel drums, heavy steel barrels, tumbling toward him on a knee-deep river of muddy water that should not have existed. Water in a salt mine. And salt dissolves in water, which meant every second that flood kept rising, the pillars holding up the ceiling were quietly melting away. Gaddison didn't hesitate. He raised the alarm. The mine's lights flashed 3 times, the signal every miner knew by heart. Drop everything, get out, now. More than 50 men were underground that morning, most of them working near the 1,500-foot level, and they began to climb. Up on the surface, the lake had begun to spin. The drill hadn't just poked a hole. It had opened a drain between a 1,300-acre lake and a hollow salt mine, and 3.5 billion gallons of water now wanted to go to the same place at once. A whirlpool formed over the puncture, small at first, then wider and faster, until it was 1/4 of a mile across, a churning funnel in the middle of what had been a calm fishing lake. The drilling platform went first, the whole 150-foot derrick tipping into the vortex and vanishing. Then the barges, 11 of them, circling toward the center like toys around a drain. Then a tugboat, then docks, trucks, and the botanical garden itself, 65 acres of trees and greenhouse and soil peeling away and pouring into the hole. Below, the miners were in a race against the water. They rode carts and ran on foot to the single elevator that could carry them out, and it could only take a handful of men at a time, cage after cage, while the flood climbed around them and the pillars kept dissolving. It should have been a massacre. Instead, it became one of the great evacuations. Every one of those men reached the surface alive. Not a single miner died. Days later, Diamond Crystal handed out awards for heroism to Gaddison and 5 others for keeping their heads while the mine filled beneath their feet. The lake, meanwhile, did something no lake is supposed to do. It emptied. It drained itself completely into the mine, and once the fresh water was gone, the pull was so strong that the canal connecting the lake to the Gulf of Mexico reversed its own direction, and salt water came roaring backward up the channel, pouring into the empty crater as a waterfall 164 feet tall. For a few days, the tallest waterfall in the entire state of Louisiana. Air trapped in the flooding mine blasted back up through the shafts in geysers 400 feet high. People who were there said it looked like the end of the world. When the water finally settled, Lake Peigneur was not the same lake. The shallow 10-foot puddle was gone, replaced by a saltwater lake 200 feet deep, the deepest in Louisiana, still there today. 9 of the 11 barges eventually bobbed back to the surface like corks once the pressure equalized. 2 were never found. Human deaths? None. The only casualties reported were 3 dogs. The salt mine, in operation from 1919, was finished, flooded beyond saving. Federal investigators from the Mine Safety and Health Administration studied the inundation. The lawsuits ran for years. Texaco pointing at the mine, and the mine pointing at the drillers. In the end, Texaco and Wilson brothers paid Diamond Crystal $32 million and another $12.8 million for the ruined gardens. And here's the lesson that outlives the spectacle. Nobody in this disaster was reckless. Nobody was drunk at the wheel. Nobody skipped a safety step out of greed. The mine was legal. The drilling was legal. Both crews were competent. The whole thing came down to a single point on a map that was off by a small margin. One number 2 teams never perfectly reconciled before steel went into the ground. That is the quiet terror of modern engineering. You can do almost everything right and still lose an entire lake because 2 people measured the same spot in slightly different ways. Which brings us back to the warning I promised you at the start. Because the eeriest detail is this: the drillers knew the mine was there. The single most important number in the whole operation was the one tying their position to the miners below, and the check that could have caught the error was simply the 2 teams aimed at the same rock, comparing their maps carefully before drilling. The warning wasn't a siren or a flashing light. It was a conversation a proper cross-check would have forced. And didn't. So here's my question for you. Drop it in the comments. If you'd been running that operation, knowing a working mine sat directly beneath your drill, what one check would you have insisted on before the bit ever touched the lake bed? I genuinely want to read your answers. Next time, we're going into a building that was standing 1 minute and gone the next. A collapse where the fatal decision wasn't a wrong number, but a change made to save money. One that quietly doomed everyone inside. If you like disasters explained properly, with the engineering laid bare, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss it. See you in the next one.